Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs and Istanbul Zaim University, I welcome you to the International Conference on Islamophobia. The theme is contextualizing Islamophobia, its impact on culture and global politics. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, and we're going to have an exciting evening with exciting speakers that I will introduce later. But also, we will start with a welcoming statement from our President, Dr. Mehmet Bulut. Dr. Bulut.
You didn't say anything. Thank you so much. It was accepted. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear former President of Religious Affairs of Republic of Turkey, dear our guests from different countries, professors, ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy and very proud to be in front of you tonight to discuss this very important issue together with such very important scholars from all of the world. In the beginning of my speech, I would like to thank to all the contributors and to all of you for being with us tonight here. Thank you so much for coming. And secondly, I would like to thanks to the organizers of this conference, to Center for Islam and Global Affairs, his director, Sami Al-Arian, and all his team. I would like to thank to all of them for this well-organized event tonight. We will discuss a really very important issue in 2 days. As you know, Islam means peace. But in recent years, especially after 2011, we called 9/11, not the East, but in the West, we start to face with a different Islam. We know Islam was the peace, and Islam was the good not just for Muslims, but for all the people in all of the world. But from that time, we started to see a different picture and different view about Islam. Islam, most of time, is together with terrorism. And Islam is, the picture of not accepting the rights of the human beings. So there are so many issues, but the main issue is we have seen Islam is different from the real Islam on media, on TVs, and in all aspects of the Western world. So what does it mean? From where this started to come? There are some different discussions, but we know towards the ends of 20th century, the clash of civilization discussions appeared in the Western world. The Huntington's theories and the others. After the collapse of communism, we started to face with a new evil, against the Western liberal system. So, this was not the first time as scientists and researchers, social scientists especially, we know from history, the Westerners, the Eurocentric view, especially on the Islam, we know it was the same, but it was not on, on TV or on, in front of all societies, but it was on the book. We know on the, the papers, in the articles. The Western civilization is, based on Roman Empire, on Greek Empire, and on Christianity. But the modern Western system, the modern Western world system, is started to be established in early modern times, from 16th century and 17th century. From that time, Europe faced with the others, first time as modern Western system. Europe conquered, Africa, then Asia, and then America. We have seen that the Europeans not accepted the rights of the others. The best thing that they have done, it was just if they can be tolerate, to make, a tolerance, it was, a big success for them. But not accept the others, the rights of the others. Who were the others? All the people of non-Europeans, So, when we look at the Islam till that time, Islam and Islamic civilization lived together with others, and Islam accepted the rights, the choices of the people. So in modern times, maybe it can be changed in Islamic world, but when we look at the representative of Islamic civilization in modern times, it was Ottoman Empire. When we look at it, the more than half population of Ottoman Empire was non-Muslims. But they, together with the Muslims, they lived together in peace more than 600 years. In Middle East, today we call it Middle East, it was Western Asia for us, in Anatolia, in Balkans, and in North Africa, everywhere. This was Ottoman Empire that lived together during the expansion time of the Europeans in the world. So, at the same time, we are looking to the Ottoman world. The people from different religions, they were living together in peace and with their choices. But in Europe, we know who were the others first. They were in modern times Protestants, The Catholics make big pressure to the Protestants. And the Ottoman Empire had to play a role to protect also Protestants in Europe. There were so many letters reached to Istanbul. One of them was the letters of William van Orange, the leader of the Dutch Republic, in 19th century. He sent a letter to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, the magnificent Süleyman, and to protect them against Catholics. So it's a long issue. I have written a book on Ottoman-Dutch economic relations. You can find details in that book, but the Ottomans also has that kind of role in history, not just to the inside of their territories, but also outside of the Ottoman territories. They had played a role to, to protect the rights of the others. So, what I am trying to say, the Western modern civilization could not accept the others as their own realities. This is the main issue of today. From this issue, we are coming to Islamophobia. This is, I think, behind these attitudes in the Western world against or towards the Muslims and to Islam, it's coming because of their paradigms, their exceptions of the others in modern times. Because the modernity in the West, rejected so many things. One of them is the others. So today, the people of the Western world and all of the world needs a new approach, to the rights of the people. And so, as Muslim intellectuals, we have very big responsibilities. First, we have to be a good representative of the Islam. Not just by our writings or just our speaking, but with our life as intellectuals, as the people in front of the society. And then we also, as the people who are living in Islamic world, we have to, make criticism towards ourselves. So it's not easy. This word or these sentences is risky for me. I understand now. I am seeing you are criticizing me now by your face because you are saying we could not find time to understand ourselves. You are talking about to make criticism about our life. So, in Turkey we have a word, we could not find time to, to praying, first to take wudu, and because of fighting against shaitans, against evils, So, you are right. 20th century, all Islamic world came under the occupation of this modern Western economic system. And they prepared so many strategies to fight to each other and not to reach to the peace first in our own lands. So, and still we have so many problems. But my idea is, again, of course, they will continue to their strategies. They have so many things in their agenda for the future of our regions, our countries, and our ummah. But the first responsibility belongs to us. We, first as intellectuals and the people in front of the society, we have to, put a right Islam. So, I am coming to the end. Before finishing my speech, I would like to stress something on our own problems. One of them is the right about the tradition of Islam and the right Islam. So, there are so many extremism today in Islamic world. I don't want to take your time about the names, but you understand what I mean. Extremist movements are, not representing good Islam. And behind them, when we look at there are, so many powers behind them. We know that. But we the people who are living in Islamic countries and the intellectuals, the right Islam and the tradition of Islam, we can, accept the middle way. We call Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, We have to focus on this point, and there are so many things we have to do on this way. So I would like to finish my speech again by thanking to all of you for being with us today. And I have an apology. I apologize from all of you because I have to leave just now because of my mother has an operation and I have to visit her. Again, thank you very much for being with us, and I hope a good conference and a successful conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bulut. As you know, Dr. Bulut is the rector of the university, and during his time here for the past 4 years, the university went from 1,700 to 9,000 students. So it's been growing, and it is a testimony to his vision that we have this center today. That's only 7 months old, but mashallah, it's been growing phenomenally, and we thank him and all our volunteers for that after God. Islamophobia, as Dr. Bulut says, is an old phenomena defined as the irrational hatred, hostility to Islam and Muslims, irrational one, as I said. And since the collapse of the Soviet Union and this thesis of the clash of civilization, Islamophobia has come to the point where many people around the world, unfortunately, look at Islam and Muslims as the new enemy or the new threat. After 9/11, that has been even elevated exponentially. So we're dealing with a worldwide phenomena that does not stop at simple racist attitudes or discrimination. It has become more of a structural approach, governmental policies that affect millions of people, not only against Muslim minorities in many countries around the world, but also against people who are majority Muslim countries. And these policies have affected millions of people in terms of destruction, death, misery. We've seen it in the 90s against the Bosnians. We see it today against the Rohingyas, for instance, in Myanmar. We saw also not only non-Muslim Islamophobia, but we also see Muslim Islamophobia. We saw this during the Arab Spring phenomena, where Islam became a focal point, which counter-revolutionary forces have come to fight against those who rose up against dictators, and they tried to re-establish and restructure their societies. Yet those forces who saw the potential that somehow Islam could become a rallying point for the people, they wanted to kill that spirit of revolution because of that irrational hatred and hostility. With us today are some of the most notable, renowned, important academics, thinkers, speakers. They come from about a dozen countries, and they will be talking to us for the next couple of days about these issues. We'll be talking about the perils of Islamophobia and the challenges of inclusion. We will talk about the roots of Islamophobia from an epistemological and historical background and approach. We'll explore the cultural and social impact of Islamophobia on societies, not only for the victims of Islamophobia, but also the practitioners of Islamophobia, because it has become an industry. We will talk about the implications for civil and human rights, especially in countries that champion themselves as being defenders of civil rights and human rights. And yet, when it comes to Muslims, somehow we have double standards. We have different systems of justice. Many people around the world are not familiar with these kinds because they are deceived with these slogans that have been thrown about. But we will talk about these issues. We will also talk about the political and strategic dimensions of Islamophobia. Islamophobia as a tool for empire building. Islamophobia and the role of Islamophobia in the Arab-Israeli conflict. We'll talk about Muslim Islamophobia, what I said earlier about their impact now, especially in the Arab countries and beyond, where Muslims, or those who claim to be Muslims, they see Islam as a threat. And we just heard that a couple of days ago from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, where he tried to portray Muslim activists as being a threat, not only to those who claim to be enemies of Islamic activists, but threat to their own societies, where he's trying to realign those who have been occupiers or have been empire builders against people in the region. So we'll talk about Islamophobia as a tool of foreign policy. And finally, we will have a session where we're going to gather all these speakers, all these brilliant minds, to talk about how we're going to confront Islamophobia, how we're going to, what kind of recommendations we can give to government officials, to NGOs, to individuals about how we can confront Islamophobia at social, cultural, and other levels. As I said, we have many speakers with us, prominent speakers. We have Professor Salman Sayyid coming from the University of Leeds from the UK. We're honored to have the former President of Diyanet, Dr. Mehmet Görmez, with us tonight. We also have Professor Farid Hafez from Salzburg University in Austria. These three prominent speakers will be our speakers tonight as keynote speakers. After the prayers, we'll have a 10-minute break, but that will be the first session, the plenary session. We also have Professor Johan Galtung, one of the most important voices for peace and dialogue in the world, from Norway, who's also the rector of Peace University, and he will be addressing this audience Sunday evening. From the United States, we have 6 speakers. We have Professor Sahar Aziz from Rutgers University, Professor Hatem Bazian and Ramon Grasfugel from the University of California in Berkeley. We have Dr. Todd Green from Luther College, Dr. Nazia Qazi from Stockton University, and Ahmed Bidea from the United Voices of America. All of them will address some of the topics I talked about concerning human rights, civil rights, empire building, and their impact politically and strategically, not only in our part of the world, but also worldwide. From Iran, we have Dr. Mohammad Marandi from the University of Tehran. From Palestine, we have Dr. Mazen Qumsiya from Beit Lahem and Birzeit universities. From Finland, we have Dr. Karina Atimurtro. And from Qatar, we had Dr. Farhan Mujahid Chak. From Singapore, we have Dr. Muhammad Nawab Osman. And for Myanmar, we're also very pleased to have with us tonight and throughout the weekend, Dr. Murang Zarni, who has dedicated his life to talk about the tragedy in Myanmar against the Rohingya Muslims. We will hear from him about genocide. From Turkey, as I said, we have some of the most important scholars in the area of Islamophobia. Dr. Görmez that I introduced earlier, but also Dr. Ravza Kavakci Khan, who is an MP in Parliament, but also in charge of human rights. Dr. Burak Erdemir, who is a representative of Turkey in Brussels, but he also specializes in monitoring Islamophobia in Europe. We also have Dr. Ali Husseinoğlu, who specializes in Islamophobia in the Balkan, but especially also in Greece, and Dr. Enes Bayrakli, who is chairing and directing the program of Islamophobia at CIGA. From we also have several of our faculty members who will be chairing most of these sessions. Dr. Omar Tashgetarin, Dr. Irhan Ishiner, Dr. Muhammad Musa, and Dr. Fatima bint Abdullah from the Political Science and International Relations Department, as well as from Islamic Sciences. We're also very privileged to have with us two other prominent guests. One is Dr. Bruce Lawrence, who will be with us here on Sunday. He is very well known. He's a professor emeritus from Duke University, specializing in Islamic studies, as well as Dr. Ahmed Abdurrahman, who's involved in many universities from Sudan, a former interior minister. He will also be with us on Sunday, and he will be with us tonight. Thank you all the speakers for accepting our invitation and being with us tonight. Thank you very much. With your permission, we're going to take a 10-minute break for prayers, and then we're going to come back to start the plenary session at 8 o'clock. Thank you very much. It's really my honor, privilege, and pleasure to be the moderator for this evening plenary session, for this panel. This panel, which will inaugurate the conference, the title of which is The Perils of Islamophobia and the Challenge of Inclusion. Here we have three distinguished speakers who will each talk about a different topic. Dr. Farid Hafez will speak about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, similarities and differences. As you know, anti-Semitism was a problem that Europe had for a long, long time. It culminated in the Second World War, where Nazi Germany tried to exterminate as many as they could. Sadly, those who were victims of this racist mentality, ideology, and policies became themselves oppressors for other people. Sadly, a problem that Europe had to deal with, somehow they exported to our part and to our region, to our part of the world and our region. Dr. Hafez is currently a professor at the University of Salzburg in Austria in the Department of Political Science and Sociology. He's also a senior researcher at Georgetown University in the US under a program called the Bridges Initiative, which also focuses on Islamophobia. In 2017, he was a Fulbright visiting professor at the University of California in Berkeley. He was also earlier a visiting professor at Columbia University in New York. He has been an active participant in many Islamophobia reports throughout the years, including a yearly Islamophobia report that is published by CIGA, and I think they just published one last week. He also is an author of books and articles on the topic. We're also going to have a lecture, a speech, a presentation by a very prominent scholar from the University of Leeds, Dr. Salman Sayyid. The title of his talk is The Intellectual Discourse of Islamophobia and its Impact on the Muslim Communities in the West. Dr. Sayyid is a professor, as I said, at the University of Leeds in England, where he holds a chair in social theory and decolonial thought. He's also the head of the School of Sociology and Social Policy. He taught at many universities, and he was also a director of the International Center for Muslim and Non-Muslim Understanding in Australia. He taught in London, Manchester, Adelaide. He is the author of many books, one of which, by the way, I'd like to tell you, was a book discussion in our center about a month ago, recalling the Caliphate. And it gendered very interesting and thoughtful discussion. Our last speaker for the evening, again, is a very prominent scholar who was the former president of Diyanet, which, when we talk about Diyanet in Turkey, we're talking about the highest level position for an Islamic cleric in the Republic of Turkey. He was the head of that institution from 2010 to 2017. He taught at many universities, including Ahmed Yesevi University in Kazakhstan and at Cairo University, and he obtained his PhD in Islamic Studies from Ankara University, where he is now also a full professor. He also lived in the United Kingdom. He speaks 4 languages: Turkish, Arabic, Kurdish, and English. Now he is about to inaugurate, I think, one of the most exciting institutions in Turkey, in Ankara, that will focus on usul and maqasid, meaning the fundamentals, the study of the fundamentals of Islam and the higher purposes, which is a unique field where he will gather the most important minds in the Muslim world to discuss these issues. Dr. Görmez will talk to us about Islamophobia and the role of Muslim scholars when it comes to that topic. Each speaker will speak about 17 to 20 minutes, followed by a small discussion, and then we'll open it to the floor. We'll start with Dr. Hafez.
O Jew, O Muslim, we Norsemen have awakened. You should fear us, we coming after you. The rage of the Norsemen thunder. Be assured, O Jew and Muslim, the Norsemen are coming after you. This is a quote taken from a poem by the National Socialist Nordic Resistance Movement in Sweden. 3 members of this group, which is a right-wing extremist group, were sentenced up to 8.5 years in prison because they were found guilty of bombings of 2 refugee housings and the libertarian social trade union Hafez in Gothenburg, which severely wounded 1 person. They were trained in urban guerrilla warfare by a Russian radical nationalist and anti-Muslim paramilitary organization. And the quote presented above is taken from a recorded video prayer to so-called All-Father Odin. in which the members of this group vote to, quote, retake our land and take the fight against you who have defiled our country, end quote. And this quote very much reveals the strong connection which is constructed between the figure of the Jew and the figure of the Muslim. The poem is taken from 2017. The Jew and the Muslim are not only identified here as the main enemies of the Norsemen, they are also identified as the main targets of the Norsemen thunder. Another similar example would be the writings on the wall of the concentration camp located in today's Austria. In 2009, big letters in red color were written on the walls saying, and I translate what is in German here, "What to our fathers were the Jews, the Muslim breed is for us. Third World War, 8th Crusade." The same letters, as you can see here, were cited over in other places in Austria throughout the following month. And the message was inconclusively clear. First, the conceived alleged threat stemming from the Jews is today projected onto Muslims. And second, what we, these Nazis, neo-Nazis, did to the Jews, these neo-Nazis will do to the Muslims, gassing them like the Nazis did to 6 million Jews in the concentration camps, and haunting them and invading their countries like it was the case with the Crusades. More astonishing than what is written here was the reaction of the public. First, there was little. And second, the only reaction to this was a press release by the then federal president, Heinz Fischer, a staunch anti-racist, I would argue, but most of all, a very cool-headed president. Coming from the Social Democratic Party, Fischer said in his press release that there was no room for, quote, anti-Semitism and xenophobia, end quote. This answer was the more peculiar since the president specifically addressed the problem that is primarily linked to the past, the killing of Jews during the Nazi regime. But he was not able to clearly find words that address the future scenario of the perpetrators of this writing, which is the wished mass killing of Muslims, their extinction and their expulsion. Also, one should add here that the German notion of xenophobia, which is used here, Fremdenfeindlichkeit, is especially contested among critical race scholars because it is seen as a very problematic notion, since literally it means hostility towards strangers. It thus adopts the category of the strange to frame the Muslim. So hence Muslims are on one side already racialized by being positioned as strange, while on the other side they are not even directly addressed as the possible victims of these words. Another historical episode makes this event and the reaction to it especially interesting in my view. There is again a relation between the figure of the Jew and the figure of the Muslim in the experience of the concentration camp. A name by which the most humiliated and physically degraded Jews in Nazi concentration camps were called was Muselmänner, a somewhat derogatory term used in the German language for naming Muslims. The reason for calling these Jews this name was because the Nazis knew them as people who prostrated themselves on the ground, being fully exhausted and not able to hold up their bodies in upright position. It also reflects the idea of an arrival of the body at a stage where the Jew submit to a status of a fatalist Muslim, who gave up their lives and have nothing more they can do than to prostrate in front of God. But these stories are obviously not part of public consciousness today. Rather, today the common narrative spread not only by right-wing extremist forces in Western societies is to believe that Islam itself is the new fascism. This is one aspect among many why the plight of Jews and Muslims as the common enemy in the eyes of white supremacism has made way for a counter-narrative that rather positions Jews and Muslims against each other. But looking back in history reveals quite the opposite. One myth that was spread beginning in 1321 was that Jews were charged with well poisoning to kill the Christian population of Europe. One aspect of the story is hardly known. The story was spread that Muslims had actually incited them to do so. This is quite interesting because many authors who argue that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia cannot be put in a comparative perspective, which is obviously more of an ideological position than an academic concern towards insight gaining. These authors repeatedly stress the difference between both, and amongst the most important arguments is that Jews are imagined as world conspirators, as almighty powerful actors. And in contrast to that, the figure of the Muslim is imagined being the weak as seen in the figure of the fatalist dead Muslim. This argument is especially put forward when it comes to the so-called völkisch anti-Semitism, which differs from Christian anti-Semitism in crucial ways. What I will do now is to concentrate my talk on this discussion, also highlighting the gendered dimension that again becomes a crucial dimension in the imagination of racists. For the Christianity-dominated Middle Ages, Muslims and Jews were both framed as following the legalistic Jehovah or Allah, while Jesus Christ in the Christian imagination represented love and mercy. During the Reformation, Jews were portrayed as the companions of the devil who had a pact with the Turks, or in other words, with the Muslims. Later, völkisch anti-Semitism shifted its focus from religion to race and a positivist notion of science, which nevertheless is embedded in a genealogy of Christian heritage. As Ivan Kalmar has demonstrated, it was Hegel who taught that there was a so-called Arab religion, out of which sprang both Judaism and Islam. Both Muslims and Jews were racialized as Semites, representing the foreigners in Europe. As Gil Anijar shows in his work, the Jew was the internal Semitic enemy, while the Muslim Arab remained the external one. A central text for the systematic dissemination of a race-based anti-Jewish world conspiracy was the publication of the well-known Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a work of the Tsarist secret police published in 1903 and later translated into many other languages. The claim of the protocols is that they are the minutes of a late 19th century meeting where Jewish leaders discussed their goal of a global Jewish hegemony by subverting the morals of non-Jewish Gentiles. And central to the minutes is a plan to control the press as well as the world's economies. After its translation into German in 1919, the Nazi regime used it to teach school children when it came to power in 1933, while in the US, Henry Ford funded the printing of 500,000 copies in the 20s. Many authors have shown that we can see conspiracy theories today which claim a secret agenda by Muslims to govern the world. I want to explore an additional component here. I argue that there is again a revival of a joint conspirational endeavor of both Muslims and Jews against dominant Europe. And now it is more, as Anijar described for the past, that the Muslim other is outside, while the Jewish other is inside Europe. Not anymore like that, but rather that both represent a global community of enemies within and also without and outside of Europe. One example here is that of Viktor Orban, current Prime Minister of Hungary, leader of the Christian conservative and ruling party Fidesz, who has been launching several campaigns against the Jewish Hungary-born US-American George Soros. Orban used anti-Semitic tropes talking of Soros, wealth, power, influence, and has called him a billionaire speculator, all reminding us of typical anti-Semitic stereotypes. It was no surprise that when his government launched as an anti-immigration campaign spreading posters of Soros with the slogan, "Let's not let Soros have the last laugh," imagining him as an almighty powerful Jew. While propagating anti-Semitic stereotypes, Orban has also managed to accuse Soros and the EU of wanting to Islamize Europe. In a speech in late July, he said that the Soros empire is using money, people, and institutions to transport migrants into Europe. In Orban's rhetoric, Soros and his alleged co-conspirator, the EU, threaten the Christian character of Europe. I quote him, "Europe is currently being prepared to hand its territory over to a new mixed Islamized Europe. In order for this to happen, for the territory to be ready to be handed over, it is necessary to continue the de-Christianization of Europe. And we can see these attempts already." End quote. Orban's Islamophobic accusations against Soros have been shared by far-right groups in Europe and the United States, which have attacked the Hungarian philanthropist for this perceived support of Islamization. Leading Islamophobic voices polemicize against Soros. Some portray him as a Nazi sympathizer involved with Islamists, who are supposed to be the last of Adolf Hitler's World War II coalition partners that have yet to be vanquished, as one website put it. And another blog says, "George Soros has all sorts of ideas, dictates relief for how Europe must sign up for its demise by importing hordes of Muslims." The conspiracy of a Jewish world domination here goes hand in hand with the imagination of a coming Eurapia and Islamization of Europe. My second and last example is another recent one, which is linked to white supremacist groups that participated in a rally in Charlottesville in the USA in August 2017. We all have seen the pictures, mass of people coming together under the slogan "Unite the Right" rally, which included different groups that were thought to be dead, like the KKK and other neo-Nazi and so-called alt-right groups, who were chanting, "White Sharia now." According to a white supremacist blog with links to websites of the organized Islamophobic network, this call for white Sharia was invented in early 2016. Its goal is to destroy prevailing cultural Marxism and socialist female hypergamy, which are traditionally Jewish inventions according to right-wing extremist conspiracy theories. According to the site's authors, white men feel abused by their white women in diverse ways, including white women seeking non-white men, leading white men to seek women of color to marry, which could ultimately lead to the destruction of white race. To counter this development, white men need to establish control over their women. They need to establish a patriarchal rule, which is how they characterize Sharia, hence the invention of the term of white Sharia. Different white supremacist media outlets promote this idea, and on one website it states, "Contrary to popular misconceptions, white Sharia has nothing at all to do with Islamic Sharia, aka sand nigger Sharia, except that it is a flavor of Sharia, so contains the word Sharia in its name. Basically, your only choice in this matter is whether you will choose white Sharia or Islamic Sharia. Because the Jews are obsessed with destroying the white race. They have weakened us internally to the point of collapse while emboldening and propping up the Islamic hordes. The Islamic hordes have become the strong horse that will come in and take everything from us, including our women and all of our money and products, as our race collapses. As such, the only solution is white Sharia." So condemning Muslims on one side and calling for the implementation of a white Sharia on the other side indeed seems paradoxical. But equating Muslimness with blackness simplifies the world into two mutually exclusive spheres: good versus evil, whiteness versus Islam. And Islam is connected to other outgroups, blacks and Jews. The imagined super powerful Jews are conspiring with the strong horses, referring to a hypersexual Muslim body that is taking away white women, white money, and white products. All four are at play: a gendered anti-Muslim, anti-black, and anti-Jewish racism. According to this idea, referring to racist German historian Oswald Spengler, the white race has lost the natural barbarism of its ancestors. It has lost its essential patriarchy. And according to this idea, quote, "The Muslim world is the only civilization left on earth today where an extreme and rigidly codified patriarchy still exists. And hence, he calls to adopt a Sharia-like form of extreme patriarchy to preserve white race." Recalling historical tropes or the Oriental patriarch, sitting among beautiful women in a harem, the call for a white Sharia is arguably a projection of the sexual desires these white supremacists who feel betrayed by white women and threatened by Muslim men have. This is a reminder of an old pattern famous with anti-Semitism. One of the famous representatives of political anti-Semitism, the French writer Edouard Drummond, described an invasion of France by Jews as the Jewish vagina. In anti-Semitism, it was the female Jewish seductress, and in Islamophobia, it is the hypersexual male Muslim. But most importantly, both refer to the frightened white man losing his dominance over white women. It is whiteness that links the fate of the Jew and the Muslim. And at this point, I quote the French Muslim activist Houria Poutelja with her offer to revolutionary love to Jews that reminds us of this twin story I just described. You're losing your historical friends. You're still in the ghetto. Why don't we go out there together? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hafez. Our second speaker is Dr. Salman Sayyid, and he will speak about the intellectual discourse of Islamophobia and its impact on Muslim societies or communities in the West. Dr. Sayyid.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me and to holding this international conference on Islamophobia. There have been many conferences on Islamophobia, and there have been many books published on Islamophobia, and even many articles published on Islamophobia. And I think it's useful to try and step back and see where we are. Last year was the 20th anniversary of a report written in 1997 in Britain called Islamophobia. And that report launched the current discussion about Islamophobia in various parts of the world. Yeah? Now, what is interesting, of course, is that this wasn't the first use of the term Islamophobia. Islamophobia had been used in 1985 in Edward Said's second edition of Orientalism. It had been used several times before by a number of other authors. And it had been used in the turn of the century in its French form, Islamophobia. Now, what is curious about each of these iterations is that every time Islamophobia has been used, there has rarely been any reference to its previous use. And this pattern continues today. So we have a situation in which we have this concept. Everyone is talking about Islamophobia, trying to understand it, but no one seems to be aware that anyone else is talking about Islamophobia and trying to understand it. So we produce a situation in which there's lots of instances of Islamophobia, but there is very little development of an engaged literature on Islamophobia itself. So you will find, you will go to conferences and you will go to talks, and you will often see the same themes being rehearsed all the time. People will tell you, well, we need to find a new word for Islamophobia because Islamophobia is not the right word. We need to deal with Muslim hatred or anti-bigotry or something like that. There'll be a constant definitional problem about Islamophobia. And again, there's nothing wrong with having definitional problems, but it's not really, the definitional problems only remain at a level of definitions rather than a level of conceptions. It's not a conceptual problem. And there's a difference between having a debate about definitions and having a debate about concepts. To have an enriched debate about concepts requires a different kind of approach. The best way I can illustrate this is perhaps to think about this. Nearly everyone in this room has a phone with a camera. And if you were to take a picture of an elephant, and then you were looking at it pixel by pixel, and you showed everyone only one pixel, you would wonder what the thing was. You only realize what the picture is if you could step back from the pixel by pixel to see something in the whole. And I think this conference, hopefully, will give us the opportunity to step back and see beyond the pixel by pixel of the various incidents of Islamophobia, to see what we're dealing with. But to do that stepping back, another way of talking about this stepping back is to describe it as theory. That's what theory is. Theory is a way of stepping back. Now, so what I'm suggesting is what we need perhaps is to start thinking about developing a theory of Islamophobia. Soon as I say developing a theory of Islamophobia, there may be some people who will say, oh my God, why do we need a theory when we've got to deal with a reality? There is nothing theoretical about the Rohingya being killed right now as we speak. There is nothing theoretical about the various instances of violence that is being visited upon Muslims because they are Muslims. But I would say to you that this distrust of theory is a problem. The reason why we need theory is not because we want to be clever and pretend to be French, or we want to do something really kind of sophisticated or something like that. We need theory because we have history. And what I mean by that is, if we were not historical beings, if we had no history, everything would be the same. And once we had settled and determined what everything meant, we would never need to have that question again. We would never need to discuss anything again. Because we are, fortunately or unfortunately, historical beings, we cannot assume that what we think, what the concepts we have, the understanding we have, is something that moves in time as we move in time. To try and illustrate this, let me try and say something very simple. We are often obsessed by trying to work out what the meaning of a word or a concept is, by trying to break it into its fragments, to its parts, like etymology. But if we say that the meaning of a word comes from its use, and that use is historical, already we are involved in trying to trace the meaning of different kinds of words and concepts. So take, for example, what it means to be Muslim. Now, Farid showed a very interesting, in his talk, a number of things which are kind of interesting. He talks about the Musulmaner in the concentration camps. The meaning of a Muslim as someone who's fatalist, someone who simply has no possibility of being able to act. This is what being a Muslim meant. Someone who just was passive. Now, there is a That's one meaning, but there's another meaning which the American comic Richard Pryor talked about, that he said that if you go to American prisons, you'll find that there are lots of different kinds of gangs in the prison, but there is also something Muslims, but then there are double Muslims, and you do not want to mess with double Muslims. And the idea was that the Muslims in that sense are not simply fatalists, they are actually prone to be too active, too aggressive. And this is one of the rationales, for example, in the United States government when it was capturing Muslims and putting them into these kind of mummified sensory deprivation suits to take them to Guantanamo. The argument was we have to do this because these people will use their teeth to cut through the cables of the plane and crash the plane. So we have to do this because they are more than human in a sense. They are able to do such violence that is almost unimaginable. Now, this is just one very simple example of showing how things move. Now, once upon a time, life was very simple in Europe. We had racists, and most of the time, racists were found on the right, and there were also anti-Semites, and that was it. They hated everyone who was not considered to be white European, their definition of European. But then we've had a phenomenon, and again, Farid mentioned some of it, but before the march in Charlottesville, there was a meeting in Washington after Trump got elected, where you had supporters of Trump shouting, "Hail Trump, hail victory," which is the Sieg Heil German kind of symbol there, and some of them doing Nazi salutes. And you say, oh, this is very easy, here are anti-Semites. But these were also people who said, on one of their leaders who made this speech, went on Israeli television to describe himself as a white Zionist. Now, you can say, well, what do we care about the twisted mentality of these people? But this is not just a random act. If people remember Andres Breivik, the mass murderer who killed 70 socialists as a way of trying to rid Europe of multiculturalists, Marxists, and Muslims, who was also dressed up as a crusader, a Knights Templar, and said he wanted to defend Israel. So all of these kinds of normal kind of understandings have become completely transformed in a way. So this is why we need to have a way of thinking around how we understand the phenomenon of Islamophobia conceptually, rather than simply drawing on various kinds of lists all the time and arguing about definitions. So what I'd like to suggest then is I'd like to conclude with three main points. How much time do I have, Rob?
10 minutes.
Oh, that's all right then. I'll talk slowly. Okay, let me make 4 points then. Okay. The first point that I want to make then is one of the abiding senses of Islamophobia that we've had is that Islamophobia affects Muslim minorities. Now, this is part of the narrative around what causes racism as well. And the narrative of white supremacy around racism is that racism is caused not by racists, but by too many immigrants or people of color. So basically, it's the presence of these people that forces white supremacists to be violent towards them. Yeah, that's the general narrative. And the argument is that if you really want to have good race relations, try and minimize these people. The less there are, I mean, they don't say it, it seems to be suggesting less targets is basically the argument, yeah? But the odd thing is this, if you look at nearly every kind of crime survey, the highest levels of racist violence occur not in areas where there are a large number of ethnic minorities, but in areas where there are very few ethnic minorities. Now, that it seems to be quite, you would think, well, that simply blows away this idea. But you can understand it. Why? Because violence occurs when there is an opportunity and there are isolated individuals or their families. When you actually have communities which have been transformed, then the violence is lessened. So part of the narrative around Islamophobia has always been, what is the cause of Islamophobia? Well, it's Muslims. If Muslims were less, and they could be less empirically, or they could be less visibly. Now here is one of the most interesting things about Islamophobia, again looking at various kind of statistics if you're interested. Unlike most incidents of violence against ethnic minorities, Islamophobia is the only one in which the primary targets tend to be women rather than men. And here, it would not surprise you to know that it's the hijabi woman who is the main target of violence against Muslims. So it is to do with the kind of visibility rather than the absence of that. So when people say, well, Muslims need to behave themselves, I would say to you that behaving yourself is not really being yourself anymore, because the definition of what it is to behave yourself becomes so tight that you might as well not be yourself. How is a piece of cloth on your head not behaving yourself? Why is that a piece of cloth that causes the French Republic to quake in its shoes? And then, of course, after the law that was passed banning French school girls from wearing the hijab, now they've moved on to the length of skirts, for example. A number of French students have been expelled from school because their skirts are too long. Now, the reason why I'm trying to do this, because I want to suggest now is a definition or a conceptualization of Islamophobia. I'd like to suggest that we think of Islamophobia as a way of regulating and disciplining Muslims by reference to a westernizing horizon. Don't worry, I'll try and unpack that for the rest of my talk. But you can see the idea of regulation through just some of the examples. That what Islamophobia is saying, that there's a way, acceptable way that you can be a citizen, or you can be a subject, or you can be a Muslim. And it is the reference to what is considered to be normal. And what is considered to be normal is what is not necessarily Western, but what is moving towards the West. So this is why in countries like in India, or in Myanmar, where you can see the idea of the Muslim interrupting the kind of progress and development of the country or society. So what I'd like to suggest then, so this is the second point, if we think of this definition of racism, Islamophobia, then I think the most useful way is to think of Islamophobia as racism. Simply as that. But racism is not simply things and attitudes that we have in our heads. Racism is institutions and regulations and structures. Islamophobia is not just hot. It's not just a van driving into a Muslim woman. It's not just someone ripping off a hijab. It's not someone just throwing acid in a Muslim's face. Islamophobia is also to do with the structures and institutions. So for example, most of us who came here would go through a certain form of airport security. And in airport security, if you are considered to be a Muslim in various ways, you probably are not being paranoid if you feel that you have extra vigilance, extra care. Okay? Let's put it like that. Now, you could say, oh, this is hatred, but really, often, the people being extra careful maybe have no antipathy, they may not hate Muslims, they may be Muslims themselves. The reason why they have to be extra careful is because there is a training manual which says look out for men with beards, or look out for women with hijab. And they have to do this, not because they hate them, it's just their job. They do it dispassionately. And that becomes so kind of ingrained that you simply think, oh, as a Muslim, I better add on another half an hour just to go where I have to go. right? So in that, so this is my third kind of point there. So we're talking about the institutionalization of Islamophobia and Islamophobia as a racism. The final point that I want to make in 3 minutes is that Islamophobia is global. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have its local instances and logics. But we live in a world where Islamophobia floats around it. That is why when you look at the instances of Islamophobia, people resort to almost the same kinds of examples, the same kinds of myths, the same kinds of language, the same kinds of practices. So various counter-radicalization measures to stop people being Muslims, they all share the idea that somehow we have to do something about Islam because Islam is ultimately in the wrong hands will be a problem. Whose hands are the right hands for Islam remains open. But this happens everywhere. The idea that some of these, the idea, for example, in India, which is interesting. Now, as probably most of you know, India is the second most populous country in the world. And there are about 800 million, that's 10 times the population of Turkey, right? So you would think they're pretty secure about how many Hindus there are in India. So you'll be quite fascinated to know that one of the biggest fears is that the Muslims will outbreed India and India will no longer be a Hindu country anymore. You think I'm joking, but it's true. And they have this category called love jihad. Have you heard of love jihad? Right, yeah, sounds much more interesting than it is. And the argument goes that you have basically trained Muslim young men who are funded by Saudi Arabia, and well, not Saudi Arabia anymore because it's reformed, let's be honest about that. It wouldn't do that sort of thing. Paid by somebody to go out and seduce Hindu or non-Muslim young women by pretending to be non-Muslim, and in that pretense they drink and carry on all these non-Muslim-y things. And then, once they have a relationship with them, they take off their mask and say, aha, I am a Muslim and you are now trapped. Now, you may say this is funny, but people have been killed for this. And the idea is this is going to be so problematic that it will alter the demographic balance in India. Now this, you may say, is funny in India, but this is the argument that runs through all of this, the Muslim overpopulation, the Islamicization. So, the final point then, for I would say to you, is this. We need to have a theoretical account of Islamophobia. Otherwise, we will be doing the same thing, identifying elephant by pixel, which not only is very long, but also ultimately pointless. Secondly, I would say to you, we have to think about Islamophobia as a global phenomenon rather than local phenomenon. And therefore, we should not think Islamophobia is something that only affects ethnic minorities. What is at stake, and this is my final point, in Islamophobia is the transformation of the relationship between the state and its citizens. And Islamophobia is simply a surface on which these changes are being written. So in the sense, what is happening in Islamophobia is a rewriting of what kind of world we're going to live in. And that is why Islamophobia needs to be resisted. Not because we are all Muslims, or most of us are Muslims here, and it's probably very terrible, but really, if Islamophobia isn't resisted, then the transformations in the world will make it a terrible place for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sayyid, for thought-provoking address, really. Our final speaker for the evening is the former president of Diyanet, İşleri, right? Get it right? And his talk will be on Islamophobia and the role of Muslim scholars. Dr. Görmez.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Elhamdülillahi Rabbil alemin. Vessalatu vesselamu ala seyyidina Muhammedin ve ala cemi'il enbiyai vel mursalin ve ala alihim ve sahbihim ecma'in. Dear President of Sabahattin Zaim University, my brother, my colleague, Professor Bulut, and dear Director of Center, Mr. Chairman, distinguished scholars, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Actually, my own language is Turkish. My father language is Kurdish. My mother language is Arabic. But Mr. Sami Al-Arian insists of speaking English. My title, Overcoming Islamophobia. I believe the role of ulama, the role of scholars on Islamophobia is overcoming, not only focusing on definition of Islamophobia again and again. We have to overcome Islamophobia. Humanity has been living in a very anxious manner for a very long time on a broad geography almost all over the world. Humanity has achieved incredible developments in the fields of science and technology. Mass communication tools immensely progressed. Borders have almost disappeared. Our world has virtually turned into a global village, but fears never decrease, and anxieties never vanish. Despite extraordinary security measures, the world failed to establish peace, security, and trust. Conflicts of power and interest are gradually increasing. Race to produce more fatal weapons does not end. Environment and nature are destroyed. Terror and violence continue to claim innocent lives. Dirty wars with no ethics and law continue to force millions of people to immigrate. Human beings are damaging each other's lives. Amidst those, people are trying to continue to live their lives. Words of peace, security, and trust are mentioned in every speech. Actually, when people say peace, they only intend to say there should be no war. When they ask peace, all they really want is not to be bothered by others. When they ask for security, all they really want is not to be harmed by others. When they say we want peace, security, and trust, they only express their worries and anxieties. A fear-fed world always keeps its presence in the subconscious of humankind. Due to this reason, they always bring the other into existence. However, one of the fundamental principles of divine religions, especially Islam, is the ability to show the virtue of asking what you want for yourself and for your brother. Golden rule, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. Unfortunately, let alone obeying this principle, people are always continuing to create new enemies. On the contrary, discrimination such as who is alike, who isn't, same religion, different religion, same nationality, different rationality, never end. People continue to categorize each other, fears, worries, and anxieties, and they discriminate about who is dangerous for this world and who is not. Anxiety and trust criteria are based on this discrimination. When considered from this point of view, the September 11 incident is an actual milestone for Islam and Muslim, also for Islamophobia. Yet, since that date, Muslims are categorized as dangerous and considered as a threat. Moreover, people started to view Islam not only as a religion, but a group to be feared. A brand new industry was established based on this fear. All kinds of instruments of the modern world are used to fuel this fear. Even this fear became the most powerful and most convincing argument of countries that do not allow victims of war to enter their countries. Actually, Islamophobia is not only visible side of this whole big process. Islamophobia was never independent from international politics, economy, interest relationships, claims of superiority, and global hegemony goals. It is true that those who produce Islamophobia industry are actually afraid of themselves. They are afraid that the order that they have established with invasions, colonial policies, despotism, injustice, and violence in years may come to an end one day. Today, as a scholar, we are no longer in the position to waste time by talking about the historical reasons and new aspects of Islamophobia. Today, we must talk about what must be done in order to overcome Islamophobia. We must talk about what kind of goodness, rahmah, we could establish from this fear surrounding humanity. عسى أن تكرهوا شيئا فهو خير لكم. Today, we are in a new stage concerning West Islam conflict and Islamophobia. It is new because all the lies behind it are disclosed. It is new because all of its ugliness and irrationality are displayed. It is new because they have lost the opportunity to hide all their tricks that they had hidden before. Neither mass destruction weapons used in Iraq, Saddam regime, not their unacceptable existence in Abu Ghraib or in Guantanamo could be hidden behind political statements. Even presence of deadly organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda hidden like a knife stuck in the heart of this region cannot be explained by Islam, which is the religion of mercy. I believe that Islamophobia is an indicator of something blessed in terms of showing some aspects of cheap propaganda methods. This shows that scientific and scholarly efforts against Islam failed. It reveals that classical Orientalism has failed. Due to this reason, they escape out of academic field by cartoons, social media, vulgar movies, lost rationality. They lack quality. They reached to a point that has no logic. This ugly picture gives every Muslim a right for self-defense. It gives us the opportunity to explain the benediction and mercy of Islam again. Even the words of Germaine Greer, one of the pioneers of feminism, who has no direct interest in Islam, saying, "This is not a fear of Islam. It is the fear of caricature of Islam," reveals the truth. It is understood that caricaturization in Western languages defines image drawing that always exaggerate some unreal points and neglect some facts. I state, after all, Western world always deals with the caricature of Islam. Through the history, they did not hesitate to invent caricature in order to avoid the original and what is real. There is another important point. False pretenses of majority of important triggermen of Islamophobia are disclosed. Ergun Michael Caner and his brother, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Walid Shubat, Noni Darwish, only a few of those. These persons have made many statements and talked many important subjects. They even gave training to army. They even gave training to police until they were disclosed. Actually, today not only Islam or Muslims are under threat. Consensus culture, ethics and law of living together are under threat. Personal freedoms, basic human rights, and future of all humanity are under threat. In this light, all humanity, especially Muslims, have a very important mission to overcome Islamophobia and free all humanity from this baseless and meaningless fear. Before anything else, it must be known that spreading this fear and threat to streets will only work for the benefit of terror organizations. At this point, the media sector has a great responsibility. Media is obliged to inform masses, and its existence is based on this mission. But there is a difference between invoking fear, forming a base for fear, and offering information. When media prioritize making a show, its language shifts a polarization. As long as the success reference of media is defined according to the number of audiences, it will be useless to expect media to do anything other than put up a show. Second of all, there is a consensus from past today about what level and degree of information will be discussed. Although everybody has the right to learn, this does not mean that all information should be offered to everyone. It is enough to open the channels of learning to everyone. When issues that should be discussed in diplomatic level and solved by security units are disseminated to masses, it will do more harm than good. Or when religious subjects that should be discussed only among Islamic scholars or private religious matters special to the individual are mentioned in the public, this will do more harm than good. Thirdly, statements based on strong feelings like bias anxiety, and fear are usually turned into statements fueling problems rather than producing solutions. Most radical discourses benefit from anxiety of masses. Decrease and reinforcement of radical discourses affects all kinds of discourses. Unfortunately, discourses of many countries today are getting stronger and gaining more discriminative characteristics. Cultural racist statements show tendency to increase. This situation works to benefit the cycle that leads to the increase in the discrimination and marginalization tendencies. Every part of the society should concentrate on its own field in order to break this cycle. Fourthly, another group that should focus on its own field are the religious actors. Religious structures, synagogue, church, mosques, religious organizations should work in an effort to maintain moderation environment. Religion is a cornerstone that is not affected by the daily weather and always tells us the truth when we ask for a reference, ad-dinu an-nasiha. Institutions making religious statements have the responsibility to put this cornerstone into practice while dealing with today's issues. Finally, fifthly, another field that must be a cornerstone is the science world. However, today's social sciences and philosophy have entered a period of self-questioning, and eventually they become introverted. When human sciences that are already questioning their own methods are asked to respond to today's issues, they refer to former methods that they already questioning and having difficulty to approve. Due to this reason, we find only semi-solutions when we expect solutions. Gaps again are filled with semi-scientific statements based on populism. In conclusion, evaluating the problem and solution within the context of only Islamophobia will not mean taking all aspects of the problem into consideration. We have to approach the Islamophobia issue with a more integrated point of view and consider all of its aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Görmez. That was flawless. That was great. Dr. Farid, you talked about the Jewish experience and obviously currently the Muslim experience. However, the Jewish communities, especially in Europe and the United States, were able to integrate. They were able to be part of the power structure, so to speak. So now it's in the mainstream, or at least it's not acceptable, it's not fashionable. It's totally rejected if people express any kind of so-called, anti-Semitic commentary. Even if you even criticize Zionism today in the mainstream, you could be considered anti-Semitic. However, people could insult Islam and Muslims with impunity. So my question is, do you think the Muslims are unique in that perspective, or they will just be the same as the other communities, the Catholics, the Jews, the blacks? I'm talking about the American experience, where they were able to overcome this type of racism. Do you think this is a unique experience for the Muslims that it will be very difficult to overcome, or is it the same path, that there is a way to overcome this? And that what Muslims are experiencing, especially in the West under the term Islamophobia, It's just another phase of racism where another minority is facing this, and it's not really very unique. So that's the question. Are Muslims unique in that fashion, or is it a similar experience?
Well, thank you. Let me try to... I don't think that I can really answer this question like in a 2-3 minutes talk, but 2 minutes I have. But I think like it really depends on how we look at it, and as Salman said in his speech, it's very much depending on our basic assumption of what we understand Islamophobia is all about. And if I follow this path of having this decolonial perspective, then I would like to quote an author, Achille Mbembe, who wrote in his book The Critique of Black Reason, in just one sentence, it's a book basically on the issue of the black in the white Western supremacist ideology and the making of blackness. And in one sentence he says, Islamophobia is nothing else but the ongoing history of a long history since 1492. And if I argue like that, then it's not simply, in my opinion, a racism that can go away, as much as I think racism has never gone away. And I think, I would say, yes, the Jews are a special group, in the sense of after 1945 they have become white, or more white. To some extent, because even the examples I gave here in my talk, like I gave one example from a right-wing extremist neo-fascist movement, but I also gave an example of a mainstream right conservative centrist political party, which very openly deploys anti-Semitism. And I think the fact that you have, especially now in the United States, I mean, all these movements being very anti-Semitic but being pro-Israeli explains very much the puzzle and what it is all about. If you argue that Israel is the extension of Western empire, rather than it is the identity of Jewish people, and if we argue that Jewish people per se are not really an exception of anti-Semitism and secured from anti-Semitism, but the leadership which is part of the power structure is part of the exception of white people belonging to whiteness.
My other question to you really is, if I try to compare, and in my mind there is a lot of similarities, but I'd like to hear your perspective of what happened to Alfred Dreyfus in the 19th century, where he was tried in France, obviously under anti-Semitic sentiments. How do you compare this to what's happening to Tariq Ramadan today, where he hasn't been charged with anything, has been accused but not even officially charged, yet he's been in prison now for about 5 or 6 weeks. And the way he's been crucified in the media with very little evidence to show for it. Do you see any similarities here? That the environment that is in Europe today, this Islamophobia that has gone not only through the media but also official structures, that the most prominent or one of the most prominent scholars is arrested and imprisoned under accusations that haven't been even official, and yet there hasn't been that outcry. Do we see any similarities here?
Well, unfortunately, the scholarship of especially German-speaking people is not that much accessible in the English-speaking world. But there are plenty of people who have written about this and who have very much compared the pre-1930s era, starting from 1870 to 1930, before the coming to power of the Nazi regime, and the growing importance of anti-Semitism in this area to what is going on today with Muslims. There is a great book by Sabine Schiff and Konstantin Wagner who have written a monography on that, but it's not accessible in English. So I would say, I mean, this point has already been made by so many people. I would also argue that, and I think that's something we very often miss, anti-Semitism was a self-proclaimed title which anti-Semitic parties gave themselves, right? It was not an accusation, you're a racist, you're anti-Semitic, but rather the political parties in the West were arguing, we are anti-Semitic, we have a problem with these Jews, right? As much as so many people today say, well, I'm proud of being Islamophobic. Okay, I mean, even here, we see those striking similarities going on in the political debate that we have in Western Europe.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sayyid, I really have a similar question about the beginning, talking about the Muslim communities in the West. Do you think the path for reducing Islamophobia, as some see it, in the empowerment of Muslim communities? In other words, the same way Jews, Catholics, blacks in America and other communities, they were empowered in civil society and politics and then became unfashionable to start being racist or at least overtly racist against them. Do you think that's the way to reduce Islamophobia, in addition to education and other civic engagement? Or is that not possible for Muslims, especially in Europe and the West?
I think it's important to not to misunderstand what civil rights was. I think a few days ago was Martin Luther King's birthday, and it was celebrated. Assassination, sorry, anniversary of his assassination. And there was a lot of kind of commentary on that. If you look at the polling evidence at the time of his assassination, he was one of the most unpopular figures in the United States at the time. It's only retrospectively that he has become sanctified. Now, if you watch any movie, everyone was against civil rights. Everyone was in favor of civil rights, except a few rednecks in the South. This was not the case. So that's the first kind of romanticism. So the question we have to ask is, how did civil rights transform as much as it did? Civil rights, when it's transformed, was not seen as here are these people who are doing something really positive, they are taking up, following the principles of the American Constitution. It was seen as a threat. It was vilified as a threat. The FBI was carrying out attacks on civil rights leaders. There was all kinds of things. If you note at the time, many of the kind of leaders of these movements had unfortunate accidents with the police quite regularly purposes. Yeah. So you have so let's understand there was violence involved in that process there. So the issue is this. If you want to say the price of admission, is it about integration? It cannot be about integration. Civil rights did not integrate African Americans into existing white America. To the extent that civil rights was successful, it transformed America. Now, you can challenge the degree to how much the transformation was, or how complete it was. But it seems to me that the idea of integration is not a feasible thing for any kind of minority. So yes, there has to be empowerment, but the empowerment must be to transform the society rather than just say to be integrated in that way.
My follow-up about empowerment, and this is an observation that I see from my experience in the United States, at least what I think probably similar in France and England and Germany, is that some people in their path and passion for empowerment, they cross many red lines. So how would you first of all, do you agree that they do? And how would you, like for instance, in the US, to get accepted, you really have to become sort of Zionist. You have to accept much of the narrative of Israel so that doors will be open for you. And in other places also, you may have to compromise in certain principles. Do you see that as being a threat? Do you see a path to empowerment without crossing red lines?
When I mean empowerment, I don't mean what I mean by empowerment is simply that these groups must become politically conscious, engage in political work to transform their societies. That's what I mean by transformation. So that means there's a question of red lines. It's not a question of crossing red lines. It's redrawing them. It's simply erasing them and forgetting them. If you don't cross red lines, you will not be empowered. The whole point about empowerment must be that you feel that you are able to rewrite the nature of the society that you live in conversation, dialogue, struggle with others. It doesn't mean you get a veto, but nor does it mean that you have to accept the already existing veto.
Thank you. Dr. Görmez, about 10 years ago, there was a book that came from RAND, written by a historian, political scientist, and I believe a sociologist. It was titled Building Moderate Muslim Networks. Basically, they tried to redefine who a Muslim is, at least the Muslim that would be acceptable to the establishment. And in it, they put 15 criteria. I think if people believe in certain, if they believe the Quran is literal from God, that will make them outside the extreme. So my question really is the role of Muslim scholars against this onslaught, because I see that there is a lot of, in your speech, you talked about this Islamophobia industry. So what would be the role of Muslim scholars, in your opinion, to confront this kind of redefining who a Muslim is without being a threat, that the society looks at them, that if they believe in the fundamentals of Islam, somehow they are extremists. They really have to leave Islam behind and become more of people who look Islam in historical experience or personal experience.
Mr. Chairman, you have to give me 5 minutes. Because I will answer your question by Arabic and you have to translate to English.
Very well.
في الحقيقة بعد ظهور الإسلاموفوبيا في عالم الإسلامي أسست مؤسسات تحت اسم إسلام الوسطية، وظهر تيار باسم الوسطية. هذه أيضا أعتقد هذه أيضا مشكلة. لماذا؟ لأن الإسلام القرآن الكريم أيضا أعلن أمة الإسلام بأنهم أمة وسطا، ولكن علينا أن نركز على النقد الذاتي كعلماء. يمكن أن أريد أن أنقسم المواجهة تجاه الإسلاموفوبيا على 3 أنواع، 3 أقسام. الإنسان عادي يواجه الإسلاموفوبيا على طريق الأنسنة الإنسانية. الحكومات يواجه الإسلاموفوبيا بطريق الحقوق، حقوق الإنسان. ولكن العلماء عليهم أن يواجهوا إسلاموفوبيا على طريق دعوية، ليس بطريق حقوق ولا طرق أخرى. طريق دعوية يلتزم أن نتجاوز هذا، أن نغرس رحمة الإسلام إلى قلوب التي فيها مخافة الإسلام، وهذه المخافة تحولت إلى عداوة الإسلام.
Tamam. Thank you very much. Dr. Görmez says after Islamophobia, there was a lot of talk about building this moderate Islam, this particular school. But Islam itself in the Quran is mentioned, that it's described as ummatan wasata, or the middle nation, balanced nation. But we also have to concentrate and focus on self-criticism. In order to confront Islamophobia, it has to be at 3 levels. The level of the individual, in which the central theme is to make Islam human. At the level of governments, they must focus on rights, human rights. On the level of scholars and preachers, they need to focus on preaching and calling for Islam. And in that, they need to present Islam as mercy to mankind, to the hearts, that they have fear of Islam, so that they transform the enmity and hostility of Islam towards the beauty of Islam.
Actually, excuse me. وسطية الإسلام مختلف تماما عن moderate Islam. Moderate Islam is different from وسطية الإسلام. ونحن كمسلمين بعيد عن إعلان moderate Islam في آونة الأخيرة أمام ترامب.
That's why I translate into middle, not moderate. Very well. Thank you very much. All right, now I'm going to open it for the audience. And let's see how many minutes I have. I have about
15 minutes. So please try to make your comment or question in less than a minute so we can take as many as possible. Dr. Amr Darrag.
Thank you very much. I have a question to Dr. Salman. When you talked about trying to come up with a theory for Islamophobia, and you talked about the globalization of Islamophobia as a global phenomenon, and also as an institutionalized phenomenon. There is a basic question that needs to be answered. Why is that? This is my question. Why do you think Islamophobia is global? Why is it institutionalized?
I will take 3 questions and then we'll get it. Yes.
My name is Ahmed Matar. I want to propose something. I think that one of the very effective antidote for Islamophobia now in United Kingdom is an Egyptian football called Mohamed Salah. Now, if you have Mohamed Salah, more than that, big number of Mohamed Salah in every field, I think you can have a very good antidote. But Mohamed Salah is not a defender. Mohamed Salah is striker. What I mean that if you are always defending, you will always lose.
He scores goals.
No, I mean when you are put in the defending side, you will lose. Okay, so the defending situation is a very poor situation. I hate always defending. I think that we must not be in that. I am not criminal. I'm innocent. No. You must strike the others. You must tell them, I am proud of my Islam. I am proud of my religion. And you have problems with such and such. God says, "In Allah yudafi an alladhina amanu." Means God defend us, but we must not defend ourselves. We must strike. God says, "ادخلوا عليهم الباب فإذا دخلتموه فإنكم غالبون." You must open the door and enter. As soon as you will enter, you will be the winners. Surah Al-Ma'idah.
Peacefully, so that we will not be understood. Okay, that was a comment. Let me see. Is there a female? I want to be. Yes. I'll come this way. Okay. Yes, right here.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much. My name is Leila. It's more like comments, actually, after what you said. Thank you very much for your valuable speeches. There is, in my mind, there is always a problem or confusion that happens, the difference between a Muslim and Islam. When I'm a Muslim, I portray my belief and my understanding of Islam. This does not mean that this is Islam. And this problem is even within the Muslim population, not only the global population. So we have to always differentiate between what a Muslim does and what Islam says we have to do and how we have to live with others. So we have to differentiate. And sometimes I think even Islamophobia shouldn't be that terminology. It's rather a Muslim phobia, or what a Muslim does that makes people fear that person. It shouldn't be the fear of Islam. Saying that, what our brother here said about that we are always in that situation that we have to defend ourselves. But to be able to strike or be active, more is the word perhaps, to be an active Muslim, you have to understand Islam very well, and you have to believe in it, and you have to love it, and you have to know your history very well, because the history now is been jogged right and left, and what we are being taught about our Islamic history in those 1,000 years that are between the Western civilization and the one before it. The European or the Caucasian man wants us to take this off of our minds. We don't know where we're coming from. There is no civilization that comes from nowhere. The Western civilization came from the Islamic civilization. So why don't they teach us the Islamic civilization and the right history and the correct history in our schools, in our universities? Not only in the Islamic countries, also in the Western countries. They have this, and I remember when the scholar Roger Garudi mentioned that he asked the Algerian thinker Malik bin Nabi. He asked him, why is the Islamic civilization not like, why didn't the Islamic civilization, why isn't there an Islamic civilization, or why is it weak, or something like that? I don't remember the exact thing. But then bin Nabi answered very cleverly. He said, why isn't the Islamic civilization like the Western civilization? Where is it now? Where do you think the Western civilization came from? You think only that the Western civilization just appeared out of nowhere after 1450, I think, up to 1453. There is 1,000 years of civilization missed. It's not taught correctly. The history is being sabotaged of the Islamic civilization. So you cannot have a Western civilization just out of the air, and you have to go back to your history. Roger Garudi could not answer, and he felt very shy because he didn't. It just struck him that where has this 1,000 years went? So if we want to be active Muslims and defend, we have to believe, and we have to have a history to be able to believe in.
Well put. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anybody on this side? Okay, here, Dr. Abdul Qadir.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much. I just want to draw our attention that not all the Westerners are anti-Islamic and Islamophobic. I lived, and I may live, my children are still living in UK for the last 40 years. We had no problem with our neighbors. I was living in a community in Leicestershire in the Muslim community. Then I moved to a village. Dr. Salman was talking about living in communities and living privately in small villages. And it's only happens once that on the occasion when some Muslims do something somewhere, like in other places, that some attacks come from only the white supremacists, those nationalists, but not all the Europeans are Islamophobic, so we should be careful about this. Just recently, on the 20th of February, there was an Egyptian girl, a teenager from Nottinghamshire. She was attacked by some of her colleagues, and she was killed 14 days ago. She died, not because of her Islam, but because maybe there was some conflict between them girls. So it's not all people with hijab that they have been killed or attacked because of Islam. So
yeah, we're trying to focus on structural policies rather than individual acts. I understand your point.
I just want to say that we should not generalize.
Yeah. Thank you very much. This side? It's in the back here. Trying to be fair, get from all.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Anwar from Thailand. In Thailand, we have this kind of thing is happening now. There is, my question will ask about what is the role of Muslim majority country to do with this kind of Islamophobia. And in the case of Thailand, we have this kind of import of extreme version of Islam, and this kind of version of Islam has been a kind of destructive force for our coexistence between Muslim and non-Muslim, which has been, there for a long time. So my question is, I think, before I ask my question, I think Muslim majority country have done very little to those people who are minority in their country. And as a scholar, I would like to ask you, really, do you think there is a need for Muslim majority country to do something with the Muslim minority in those countries?
Right.
And if there is a need, what would be your
Thank you. That question will be for Dr. Görmez. All right, this side here, let's see, in the back.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay, I'm Hussein from Ibn Khaldun University. So my question would be to Dr. Salman Sayyid, what do you think would be the role of a public intellectual in this regard from the Muslim communities? Or do we need such public intellectuals to voice out these issues? Thank you.
Very good question. Last round, start here in the middle.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Muna, and I work for Human Rights International Organization. So my question is for Dr. Sayyid. I really want you to dig deeper on this transformation between the relationship between the state and the citizen. Is really important because as we see the terrorism, it's also a symptom of failing globalization. So if Islamophobia is another symptom, can you give us more, about that?
Thank you. Ibrahim?
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ibrahim. I have a question for Mr. Sayyid. You drew the parallel and disparity between the civil rights and the anti-civil rights in the 60s and the Islamophobia. My question is, since there's a polarity within the US culture and society in the 60s, not North and South, but people who were more progressive and people who were prejudiced, don't you see, or do you see that a polarity could exist now that there is a weight in the Islamic force or activism, both in Europe and in the US, that could create a tipping point where we Muslims in Europe and in the US can make a difference, where it becomes not fashionable to say, for example, in the 60s, the N word, unless it was a backyard fence whisper. Thank you.
Thank you. Sahar?
My name is Sahar Aziz, and my question is for Dr. Farid and Dr. Salman. I wanted to see what parallels, or I'm asking about what parallels you see between the US context and the European context, particularly with regard to the structural components of Islamophobia and the differences in the historical relationship between, or lack thereof, between the Muslim majority states, regions, provinces, and specifically thinking, I'll kind of give you a tip of what I'm thinking, is, Orientalism in many ways is a European experience, and then to what extent did that Orientalism transfer to the United States, whereas its primary structural racial problem is black-white. So where does Islamophobia fit when you're looking at these structures and these different historical relationships with Islam, Islamic civilization, Islamic caliphates?
Thank you. Yes?
Assalamu alaikum. I have come from Afghanistan. My name is Ilham. Islamophobia is, I think, a byproduct of war against terrorism and how Muslims are defined. There was love with Muslims when Muslims were fighting against communism in Afghanistan. And there is one more thing that I'm just 33 years old, and every Friday prayer I'm going to Salah. Our imams are, in their khutbahs, they are saying, وَزَلْزِلْ أَقْدَامَهُمْ وَخَرِّبْ دِيَارَهُمْ, and they are every Friday prayer. Plus, whether they are Hindus, they are Sikhs, they are Jews, they are Christians, they are always teaching us, preaching against them. They are dirty, they are, they are people not to be touched, we have to be away from them. These are the things we have to tolerate now, because as our brother earlier said, that we have to be strikers. We were strikers and we have been striking them. Now we have to tolerate what is happening to us. Thanks.
Somehow I don't like the striker analogy at all. All right, last one.
Dr. Ahmed Sayyid, United States, been, you might classify as an activist or a volunteer imam. First, before I proceed, I'd like to thank all the distinguished speakers for their input. The question is about...
Which state you come from?
State of, well, I've been throughout the nation of United States. I reside in Michigan. I've been in New Jersey, Connecticut as a volunteer imam, Washington, D.C., different places. And based on this humble experience, I wanted to see if there is any academic statistical research in this area, whether or not the nature of this disease, Islamophobia, is religious, is it political, is it economical, is it social, is it something else, is it a combination of all, so that we at least have the, let me tell you this, the Islamophobes are not strong. They're not strong. We should work more on understanding what we're here for. If we understand in depth what we're here for, individually and collectively, and again I join the brother here in the end who issued or raised the issue of getting help, not only individually, because I'm sure that there is no specific unified strategy for regular Muslims to confront peacefully in this regard, let alone at the level of the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. By the way, the last session is going to be about ideas, thoughts, and the recommendations for confronting. And in terms of powerful Islamophobes, we have one now in the White House who just appointed some of the most hateful Islamophobes you can find as Secretary of State, National Security Advisor. Anyway, I have about 3.5 minutes for each speaker to respond, so I can make them 4 minutes. But please, try to address as many of these questions as you can. We'll start with Farid, and then Salman, and then Dr. Görmez.
Since there were, I think, only one question addressed to me, I might give 1 minute away to the other two colleagues on the podium. And I will just address the issue which you, Aziza, right? Sahar raised, which is the issue of parallels and differences in terms of US and European experiences. And I think there is really, we had a similar talk today with a US friend of yours. I think there is really one crucial dimension which makes the institutional dimension of Islamophobia so different in Europe versus the United States. And I think that has to do and can be explained primarily with the liberal tradition of how the state is understood in the United States versus the very strong state you have in most cases in continental Europe, or let's say in Western Europe, which is when it comes to religion, the state basically in the United States won't interfere. And you can do everything, nearly everything, from a religious basis. While in what I see, there is a big wave now, and you can observe that with Emmanuel Macron, who just declared he has a plan to make a French Islam, to all the legislation that is pushed through in countries, the German-speaking countries like Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and all these Islam conferences and all these debates about how to create a German, Italian, French, Dutch, Swedish, etc. Islam. So the state has a big role to play here because the institutions that are built by the governments are very much focusing on this project. Well, I think you do have similar projects, but these projects are depending on think tanks or foundations or whatever in the United States, but it's not a state structure that is behind it. And I think that's really crucial because at the end of the day, what you see that the organized masses of Muslim organizations in European nation states are facing a big apparatus that wants to define what their religion is all about. While these movements are very much confined to the private sector in the United States of America. So to give you just one example, and I'll finish with that, looking at, for instance, how people were reacting to Donald Trump, and how people are reacting to Le Front National, the Freedom Party in Austria, the Sweden Democrats, or whatever, there is a big difference. And that has to do with the strong versus the weak state, with a strong liberal tradition versus let's say, more of an authoritarian a religion of an authoritarian tendency, which you have when you describe what the state basically is all about, and how much freedom the individual can have as a citizen in a country. And I think that really gives two different dynamics to how Islamophobia on an institutional level works. Let aside the whole security apparatus, where you have, I would say, more similarities.
Thank you very much, Professor Sayyid.
Okay. Looking at all these questions, I wish I'd given another talk now. But I'll try and answer some of them because I think they are connected. Let me start off with a question about why Islamophobia. The short answer, because I've only got so time, is that I would say that Islamophobia is caused by the crisis of white supremacy. Now, once you say that, you need to unpack it in relation to places like India, Myanmar, etc. But trust me, I can do that, but not just in this time in a way there. But part of it is the crisis of the notion of the nation state. And this is why I think the Muslim as a transnational subject that cannot be contained in the nation state becomes the kind of symptom of the decline of this nation-state's ability to control and regulate itself and meet its national destiny. But that's a shorter version of that, so forgive me for that. I think linked with that question you were asking about the state-civil relationships, I think this is the crucial point here. It seems to me that from about 1945 till about 1989, you had this model of what the role of the state should be in relation to its citizens. And it was a kind of a model of care. Whether it was done through in the capitalist system, through kind of private healthcare, private kind of provisions, etc., or it was done in the Soviet model. That relationship is now being transformed in a sense that the state does not think that it really wants people. They can all be replaced by robots anyway, so they're a pain. And so part of it is about rewriting what it means to talk about human rights, to even talk about the humanity of human rights, etc. So if I was to say to you that, just September, on 10th of September, that the American government within a few years will take on powers to check every library book that ever went out of the American, any library in the United States, you would say that I was being crazy and it was absolutely hallucinatory, right? If you look at all the civil rights that have been eroded, only in relation to Muslims right now, but once you have the machinery in place, it just slips around. It is staggering. So the fact that, for example, you are now moving into a position, for example, where people's ability to protest against what is happening to Palestinians is now becoming seen as a sign of their anti-Semitism. So in a sense, anti-Semitism is moving away from anti-Semite, what used to be someone who didn't like Jews. Now anti-Semite is someone Jews don't like, or certain Jews don't like. And in a sense, what you have is that there's a kind of an Islamophobia around there, that it is put into a zero-sum thing. So the question about what it means to be a citizen, I think, is being rewritten in there. So that links me up with the question about public intellectuals. My public intellectuals, it really depends who they are and what they're saying. Just being a public intellectual in itself isn't a good idea necessarily, because most public intellectuals are really purveyors of Islamophobia rather than those who combat against Islamophobia. So I think certainly we need people who are going to be engaged in that conversation, but perhaps we need new public intellectuals to be doing that, because I think that's an important work. The final point that I wanted to say, and this is really a tricky one, and a kind of question about what Muslim majorities and countries should be doing for Muslim minorities. The reason why I think this is really problematic is that people really don't think carefully about the history of Muslim societies in relation to minorities. Now, I don't want to romanticize the situation or anything like that, but let me give you one simple example. Britain became Christian within just 100 or 200 years before what is Iraq now became Muslim. Yeah? So within 100 years of one another there. If you go to Britain, the only religious minorities you will meet are the ones who came in the 19th century, either Jews, or you will meet Muslims, Hindus, etc., came after 1945. There are no pre-Christian minorities in the island of Britain. In Iraq, when you hear about the Yazidi community being persecuted, the point is that it still exists. Minorities in Iraq exist in their millions or hundreds of thousands. So, if Islam was so powerful in terms of eroding it, why is it that 1,000+ years of rule of Christians in Britain wiped out? There are no pagans except people who go to rock concerts. There's no pagan community in Britain. There are no Druids. There's no pre-Christian community. You will not be able to find a working temple of Mithras. Even the Jews who used to be there were expelled, and they had to come back again in the 19th century. If you go to Iraq, you'll find communities who've been there before Islam was, as communities. So if we remember that, then the question about how to treat our minorities or treat minorities, it's not that it's an ideal position, but let's understand what the question of minorities is. The problem with minorities is not the minorities, it's the problem of creating national majorities, which is an invention of the nation state, and for most countries in Muslim lands, the invention of the nation state is to do with the colonial order. And that is what created the minorities and dispossessed them at the same time. In places like Thailand, in China, in places like India, Russia, China, the state grew up around Muslims. It's not that they came as immigrants. And it's that reconfiguration of the state which is a problem here. So I think we have to, this is why I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about these things about Islamophobia being theoretical and also trying to sort of work around some of these issues, we have to remember, if we confine ourselves to understanding of a history and a language which is given to us without being able to put these examples into place, we will be beating ourselves up for the wrong things. So the fundamental thing about fighting Islamophobia is not to have good Muslims, it's the right to be a bad Muslim in peace and quiet.
Thank you. What a powerful answer. Dr. Görmez.
سؤالين موجه إلي، واحد من تايلاند وواحد من أفغانستان. كلمة أو تركيب عالم الإسلامي تغيرت تماما، لأن قبل 50 سنة كان لا يوجد في نصف العالم أي مسلم لا يعيش، ولكن الآن 30% من المسلمين يعيشون كأقلية في العالم الإسلامي. لأجل هذا على دول الإسلامية التعاون مع إخوانهم الأقليات المسلمة في كل العالم، ولكن بشرط أن يذهب إليهم لرضا الله وحده لا لإيديولوجياتهم. يعني أحيانا هم يذهب الشيعي ويعطي الخبز مع شيعيته، ويذهب السلفية ويعطي الخبز والكتب مع سلفيته. هذا لا يليق بنا، وعلينا أن نتعاون معهم لرضا الله وحده فقط. والثاني في الحقيقة السؤال من أخي أفغانستان، علينا أن نغير هذه اللغة حتى في الأدعية. نحن أتينا إلى الدنيا لعمارة الديار لا لتخريب الديار. رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: بعثت رحمة ما بعثت لعانا. نعم، هو دعا على من قتل 70 قراء في بئر المعونة، ونحن نذكر نفس الدعاء ونوجه لكل العالم. هذا لا يجوز. يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى: لا ينهاكم عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم. علينا أن نركز على الرحمة. وأخيرا أريد أن أذكر معاليكم للحضور شيء. أعتقد كمسلم societies وعلماء universities, we have to do something for Brother Tariq Ramazan. By the way, I met with him several times, and just before last situation we met in Malaysia. I think he is last victim of Islamophobia. We have to do something. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Dr. Görmez. I'm going to give a quick translation. Is it the Muslim world has gone through a lot of changes. 50 years ago, half of the world did not even have Muslims. Today, 30% of Muslims are in non-Muslim majority countries outside the Muslim world, so-called Muslim world. So they said that the Muslim majority countries, they have to go and actually help and cooperate with so-called Muslim minorities, but not for a specific purpose, but to gain the pleasure of Allah. And he gave a couple of examples, like Salafis going there and giving certain books so that they can preach their own ideologies or other madhabs. As far as the question from Afghanistan regarding the prayers, especially in Jum'ah prayers, he said we have to change this kind of language. This is unacceptable. The Prophet was sent as a mercy to mankind, not a cursor. And when he gave a certain prayer for those who in Ghazwat Uhud, in Uhud battle, for a special occasion, those who killed 70 Muslims in a special occasion, that was a very specific prayer that should not be repeated for others everywhere. And he gave the example also from the verse of the Quran that God did not forbid you for those who did not fight you and did not exile you from your own homes, that you deal with them with piety and righteousness and goodness. And finally, he said, and he said it in English, about we have to do something as Muslims for the case of Dr. Tariq Ramadan. I really want to thank our panelists here for a great start for this conference. It was I wish we had another hour, basically. I enjoyed this so much. But, we thank them for an analytical, thought-provoking, forward-looking, and illuminating discussion. Thank you so much for all of you. There are one more thing. I would like to give you some departing gifts, plates from our conference, but also would like to remind the audience about tomorrow and Sunday. Please, this is a great crowd. You're going to gain so much. We have an excellent panelists tomorrow morning. For the first session, it's Understanding the Roots of Islamophobia, an epistemological and historical approach. We'll have Dr. Todd Green from Luther College. He will speak about the political and cultural factors in the rise of Islamophobia. Dr. Muhammad Marandi about the intellectual framework of Islamophobia, one of the questions that was asked tonight. And Dr. Burak Erdir, who joined us also from Brussels. He represents Turkey in Europe, and he will talk about why is Islamophobia prevalent today. You have the conference booklet. There are also 2 more sessions that will be very, very interesting for all of you. So again, thank you very much for being with us tonight, and please let's see you tomorrow. And give me a moment here to give the gifts. Dr. Farid. Dr. Salman. Dr. Görmez.
stuff.